he may get what the Quakers call an opening that will bring him at once psychically, and I think spiritually, I use the term psychically, into the ken of what he recognizes as the transcendent and creative possibility of his life, which he has experienced in prayer. Yes, you are frowning.
Will this always be fragmentary in relation to other creatures?
In relation to other creatures?
Yeah, that you would.
No, I wouldn't use the word fragmentary. I think that it is, unless you mean that he may sense this in fragments of his experience.
What I mean.
Yeah, that's right.
In other words, since we are not absolute, you can never hope to get this always.
No, but you see, back to something you said earlier. One of the advantages about conditioning the nervous system, remember we talked about that for a minute to sometime in the past, that in meditation you set up fresh neuronic paths. And when they're stimulated, the thing moves. And you get the mood, the quality of being that becomes an inner climate. Even though you may be busily engaged in doing whatever you're doing. The only time that I was sent home from Sunday school when I was a boy, in those days, the Sunday school lesson, the little children had what they called charts. And the charts were pictures, reproductions in color of paintings depicting whatever the biblical thing was. This was on Daniel and the Lion's Den, and there was a colored print of Daniel praying in this pit. And then there was a shaft of light that came through an opening in the ceiling. And then around him were 3 or 4 lions waiting for him to get through so they could eat. And the question on the chart was, what was Daniel doing in the lion's den? And the answer, of course, the stock answer was, he was praying. And I kept doing this, and finally my teacher said, well, what is it now? So I said, Daniel wasn't praying. He was watching the lions because he had done his praying before he got into the lion's den. And it's illustrative what I'm talking about, that and I hope you can see this. I just ache for you to see it, that you are a living organism, with all these neuronic paths going up and down everywhere. And you can condition it. You can retread your nervous system. That's not the word. Retool it, that's the word. You can retool it. But by systematically, with care, with discipline, systematically feeding it materials, the quality of which will induce in you an inner climate that you carry around with you, that becomes a part of the center out of which you relate to life. And there's no hocus pocus in this. It's just simple, garden variety, ordinary psychology. And we do it all the time with reference to all sorts of things. And I'm saying, apply this to that which means, from my point of view, the most transcendent, significant thing in life. Well, now, and to digress further, since I have digressed that far, you can do this by feeding your nervous system. A certain kind of music you listen to. There are great insights, prose and poetic insights that not only in the intake of them feed the mind or the aesthetic ache, but that do this meticulous job of paving the way for the total transformation of your life. And no one, not even God, can do this for the individual. Now, to push on. There are times in which I think that the individual feels so with it in these moments that everything else seems secular, seems profane. But I think such an attitude is one that is unwell. Now, in one of the great songs, one gets a complete sense of what I'm talking about. And from my point of view, it is the greatest single chapter in the Bible. From my point of view, with all my prejudices, this is what I think about it. It's 139th song. And you remember how it goes. Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Listen to it. Thou knowest my down sitting and my uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down. Thou art acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a thought, not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it all to together. Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thy hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain unto it. Now, whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and fly to the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand hold me, and thy right hand shall steady me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee. For thou hast possessed my reins, my going, my coming. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. And in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee. And now the picture. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. Why? And see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Now this is the effort on the part of a poet to say that man lives, functions, does all of his doing within the divine context. The awareness of this fact is the essence of prayer. The awareness of this. And that's why it can be precipitated in ways, again and again, in ways that may not remotely be connected with what the individual recognizes at the time. as an experiential friend. Now, so much for that. Nibble at it for the rest of the 9 days, but I want to move now. Unless you have a question. If you have a question, please say it. Of course, I realize how stampede that is. Suddenly, that's should be a question. But it's only one way to do it unless I ask you. So if you have one, please. Good. Not bad. Now I want to begin our journey with the first of these characters, individuals, because in seeing how they go at what they do, you will see at work certain of the things we've been talking about up to the present time. I begin with Jesus, and I begin with Jesus for very obvious reasons. Back at the early part of the 19th century, two German men, Weinel and Widgery, wrote a book about Jesus as a prelude to the whole German movement. And in this book, they have a very striking phrase, and it is this, that men may come to God through nature, men may come to God through other good men. But he who seeks God with all of his heart will somewhere on his journey encounter Jesus, which from one point of view may not be as Christological as we might have it, or some people might have. Or as Schweitzer puts it at the end of his quest to historical Jesus. And he does such a completely devastating job from the point of view of a certain kind of Protestant orthodoxy. But he ends it with those very moving lines that, how do they go? He comes to us as one unknown without a name, as he came to the men by the lakeside who knew him not. He speaks to us the same language. Follow me, and to those who obey him, whether they be wise or simple. He will reveal himself in the toils and the sufferings and the sorrows through which they shall, joys through which they shall pass in his fellowship. And as an ineffable mystery, they shall learn in their own experience who he is. Now what I want to do is not to give any sort of Christological interpretation or even very much of historical something, but I want to call attention to the way the experience, the ineffable experience of God son of the house of Ishmael, a Jew. How that experience defined the movement and the character, the flow that has become central emphasis in one of the great religions of the world, named Christianity. So I began then with the encounter, and I assume that all of you are lifetime students of the Bible. And if it is a gratuitous assumption, don't disillusion me. But there was a man preaching down at the Jordan River at the setting. And this man's name was John. Now, he was not very prepossessing, according to the descriptions that are given to him in the book. He was a little wild-eyed, long, unkempt locks. Of course, you're familiar with that. He was eating, living on locusts and wild honey, so he was at the beginning of the organic movement. And he had only one fantastic thing to say, and that is, you better wake up, because you're living in the end of the age. And the only way that you can save your age is to confess your sins and as a symbol of this, I will baptize you in the Jordan River. Now, up in a village, there was a young man who, according to the story, who lived in a family, and he worked in Joseph's coffee shop. And the rumor reached way over there where he was staying. All kinds of people came out. And we don't know. We don't know what happened. And it's fine that we don't know, because then it means that the imagination has free creative range. Let's just think if you were a prisoner of facts all the time. But he presented himself to John, John baptized him. He did not waste any time on the etiquette and the exchange, because that reflected a lot of other things that are irrelevant. But he was baptized of John, and then something happened. According to what he said. Now, no one else saw this. No one else heard it. But what did he say? In telling about it, he said, the heavens opened. Vision. And what else happened? According to this story, that the Spirit of God descended upon him like a dove. Then what else? Then he heard a voice. And what did the voice say? Thou art my son, my beloved. In thee I am well pleased, all this day I have begotten thee. I created thee. Personal, primary, exclusive, intimate, transcendent vision, defining the meaning and the character of his life for his ears and his eyes. And the only way that we have any record of it is that he told it. The role of the voice in human life is a very interesting one. Remember in Bernard Shaw's Back to Methuselah, I think it's in the introduction or somewhere, it doesn't matter where. Eve is talking about Noah. And she says that Noah spends all of his time out in the hills, listening to the sound of the voice. He has listened to the voice until he has become the voice. The whole interesting area of exciting journey, the role of the voice in the destiny of man. And it is not all confined to the psychotic. To the emotionally overwrought. We're dealing with a very significant kind of sin. At any rate, he hears the voice. Now what follows is of tremendous significance. He went from this experience of illumination into the solitary place, the wilderness. To define in terms of his life the import of the voice he heard. And each word is important. We're talking about. Not to define the import of the voice for those people to whom he told the story about hearing the voice. No. Another place once again, you see, we are standing in the presence of the mystery of crisis in human life. Mystery of crisis. In Isaiah, remember, in the year that King Uzziah died, which was a moment which was a traumatic and horrendous moment in the life of this very elite Jewish man, Isaiah. And he says, he's in the temple, in the year the king Uzziah died, I saw the Lord and his glory filled the whole temple. And there were cherubim and seraphim. Ooh. And one of these did what? One of these took a live coal from the altar and put it on his tongue. Have you heard a voice say, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? Then Isaiah said, then said I, here am I, send me. Vision puts its imprimatur on the life, and the life is altered in the light of the overwhelming intensity of the experience. And this, when another character, when Paul sees the light and hears the voice again, what did he do? He went into the wilderness. Remember in Newman's dream of Gerontius? You remember the soul is visiting in heaven? Well, yeah. He's having a personally conducted tour by one of the angels. And they were going along, enjoying the scenery and having some private discussion. And they looked over a certain area and rolling hills and that sort of thing. And the soul said to the angel, what's over there? And the angel said, that's where God lives. All my life I wanted to see God. And as soon as the person, this visitor, the soul says that the angel wings, no one who really aches to see God can be denied. But he must be prepared for the presence. So this angel turns the soul over to the angel of the agony to prepare the stripping process, to prepare the soul for the presence of God. And when the soul has this radical exposure, and if you hear the music, when the soul is faced with God, there's a great breathless silence. And then the string, choir, and all the rest is pandemonium reigns, because the soul now is crying, take me away, take me away. It's a quiet, dark place where I can recover from the ravages of pure love, of pure righteousness, of purity itself. All right. Reading something which is another way of summarizing what the basic point that the mystic is making about the indwelling of God's Spirit in human life, in the life of the individual. Whether the awareness is conscious or not, the ground is there waiting to assert itself at some moment in consciousness or some extraordinary encounter with an aspect of life that has a total impact upon the life, that makes one raise the ultimate question about who he is, who she is, what is the point of the individual existence, what does the private life mean in terms of the meaning of life in general. And these are the words. It is good to remember that God has not left himself without a witness in our spirits. There is a spirit in us that contains our spirit, that provides the secondary consolations which float the big anxieties, that sustains the effort beyond the calculated endurance, that makes the case for the good impulse when the rational judgment sends the mind spinning in the opposite way, that brooks over all weariness and all despair until the change comes and the heart is revived, that holds the confidence and the integrity of the self when the deeds that one does contradict and will not be stilled, and the act that destroys goes on its relentless way. It is good to remember that God has not left himself without witness in our spirits. It is good to remember that God has not left himself without a witness in our lives. There is at work in life much that seems so circumstantial that the release of explanation can come only by the great word coincidence. Even the most cursory examination of what may be regarded as the most commonplace life shows that at many points startling things have occurred that altered the entire direction of the life. Some chance word heard at a critical moment in your life, some single encounter along the way, even a paragraph tucked away in an ordinary book, a stray thought out of nowhere finds a cuddling place in the mind. And there it begins to live and breathe and reproduce its kind until something emerges within us as a new outlook, a different way of thinking. It is good to remember that God has not left himself without a witness in our lives. Despite all the wanderings of our footsteps, despite all the ways by which we may have sought to circumvent the truth within us, despite all the weaknesses of spirit and of mind, despite all the blunders by which we may have isolated ourselves from our fellows or proven unworthy of the love, the trust, the confidence by which again and again our faltering lives are surrounded, Despite all these things, it is good to remember that God has not left himself without a witness in our spirits and in our lives. I'd like to pick up the threads of our discussion by way of capitulation. You may remember that we were talking about the central and dramatic experience of Jesus at the time of his baptism. And it was a time of rather radical illumination, and he described it in language that made sense to his mind, and also that belonged to the general climate of language by which he was surrounded. For it doesn't matter how fundamentally significant, dramatic, catastrophic may be any particular experience that you may have. The experience itself has to be accommodated to the facts of your particular life. If you talk about it, for instance, you must describe it in language that is a part of the common coin of your vocabulary, your culture. That there is a kind of canonical judgment that becomes the embodiment of the residue of the thought and the phrases, the vocabulary of the period in which we live. And if a man's insight or if his experience is premature as far as the body of knowledge with which he's acquainted, then often there's a long time interval between the disclosure, the discovery, and when that discovery finds its accommodation in the regular stream of the pattern of your life. For instance, we see it in science. There is perhaps there are maybe as long as 50 years separating the time when a German scientist first discovered that DNA is a part of the nucleus of the cell, a very decisive part of the cell that has the clue to all of the subsequent behavior and life and development of the cell. Nearly 50 years after, did some other scientists pick this up, and they were able, because of the development that had taken place in the whole movement of the scientific process, so that now, 50 years after, this discovery could become a part of the canon of scientific knowledge. And it was some time after that before we began talking about the genetic code that is in the cell. And if we understand this genetic code, then we can determine and interpret and predict the behavior of the cell. What I'm saying is that it doesn't matter how privately significant and meaningful and dramatic your particular